Imagine just for a second, if the moral laws that govern human society were as predictable and as impartial as the laws of physics.
Right, like, just let that sink in for a moment. It's a pretty profound thought experiment to kick things off.
It really is, because usually, when we talk about morality, we're operating in this realm of philosophy or maybe sociology.
Yeah, it's negotiable, it's debated.
Exactly. It's debated in lecture halls, it's argued over dinner tables. But think about gravity. You don't debate gravity.
No, you definitely don't.
You jump off a building, you fall. It really doesn't matter if you're a saint, a sinner, a billionaire, CEO, or someone working a minimum wage job.
The pavement doesn't check your resume on the way down.
Right. There is zero negotiation. It is an absolute verifiable consequence. You interact with the physical law, and the physical law responds uniformly.
And so, if we play this out, what if human morality worked through that exact same mechanism?
Yeah, what if stealing from your neighbor or, defrauding a complete stranger carried the exact same immediate, verifiable consequence as drinking a cup of poison?
Which is a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It is. What if a nation exploiting another nation for its resources wasn't just categorized as, ruthless geopolitics, but was actually a literal mechanical violation of natural law?
A violation that would inevitably destroy the society doing the exploiting.
Just as surely as holding your breath eventually destroys your brain cells.
I mean, if that were true, we'd have to completely rewire how we understand reality itself.
Oh, totally. Because we compartmentalize ethics so much.
We do. We treat them as these subjective ideals to strive for, not as structural load-bearing beams of the universe.
Right.
If morality is physics, then a lot of what we call clever politics or smart business is actually just societal suicide.
And throwing out that compartmentalization is exactly what we're doing today. We are so glad you're here with us for this deep dive.
It's going to be a heavy one.
Oh, for sure. Today's mission is to unpack this stack of incredibly dense, highly analytical notes and translated transcripts that outline what this source material calls a blueprint for a universal Quranic social order.
Yeah, and to give some context on the material, this isn't some surface-level inspirational reading of ancient texts.
Definitely not.
We are looking at a rational, highly systematic verse-by-verse analysis of Surah Al-Imran, specifically focusing on verses 71 through 78. And this was conducted by the thinker, G.A. Parwez.
Right. And the mission of our deep dive today is to understand how this specific framework radically reinterprets ancient scripture.
Radically being the key word there.
Truly. I mean, it upends the entire table. The argument here is that this book was never meant to be a collection of private rituals.
Right.
It's not meant to be a weekend spiritual retreat or a self-help guide. It is presented as a socio-political constitution.
Designed from the ground up to completely eradicate human division and inequality.
Exactly. And it does so by demanding that we treat these ethical laws with the exact same absolute uniformity as the laws of physics.
It essentially removes the belief aspect and replaces it with compliance to natural law.
Which is huge. Now, before we take the plunge into the actual mechanics of this blueprint, I need to make a crucial, absolute, 100% clear disclaimer to you, our listener.
Yes, very important.
The source material we are diving into today contains very strong, historically and theologically charged critiques.
Oh, it goes after everything.
It really does. It heavily critiques historical practices, modern religious institutions, priesthoods, and political systems across the entire spectrum.
It leaves almost no established system untouched, honestly, whether ancient or contemporary.
Right, and we need to make it absolutely clear to you. We are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing these specific religious, theological, or political viewpoints. The sources critique left-wing concepts, right-wing concepts, specific historical sects, historical figures, and throughout all of it, we remain entirely neutral.
Our job today, our only job, is to act as your guides.
Exactly. We are here to convey and explore these fascinating ideas, these arguments, and these paradigms exactly as they are contained in the source material provided.
We are looking at the architecture of the argument, testing its internal logic, and trying to understand its implications. We're not telling you what to believe.
Basically, we are putting on our engineering hard hats, walking onto the construction site of this philosophy, and looking at how the architect intended the pieces to fit together.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. But with that framework in place, I look at this stack of notes, and I honestly struggle with where to even grab the first thread.
It's incredibly dense.
It is. How do you approach a text that claims to fundamentally redefine the very concept of religion?
Well, you really have to start right at the bedrock of their argument. The entire framework that Parwez builds rests on this massive linguistic and conceptual paradigm shift.
Okay, lay it on me.
There is a fundamental clash between two concepts that the text argues have been completely, tragically conflated by history. We need to look at the clash between the Arabic term deen and the term mazhab.
Okay, let's unpack this clash. Because usually, in common parlance, those words are used interchangeably to mean religion, right?
They are. And the text argues that this interchangeability is not just some minor translation error. It is a catastrophic societal failure.
Catastrophic.
Yes. The source claims that translating deen as religion, which is often referred to as mazhab in Urdu and modern Arabic contexts, has entirely derailed humanity's understanding of the original message.
I want to push back on that a little, or at least ask for clarification, because how can a simple translation issue cause a catastrophic societal failure? Words evolve, you know. Why is this distinction the hill this text chooses to die on?
Because the concepts they represent are diametrically opposed in this framework. Let's look at how the text defines the concept of mazhab, or fragmented religion.
Okay.
The analysis argues that fragmented religion is a degradation of the original message. It's a private belief system.
Private, okay.
Right. It focuses heavily on individual rituals, subjective traditions, and most dangerously, it inherently creates sectarian monopolies.
Sectarian monopolies?
Yeah, it is managed and controlled by a religious elite. The ultimate goal of fragmented religion is what you do in private to secure your own personal spiritual salvation after you die.
So in this framework, fragmented religion is inherently exclusive. It naturally divides humanity into us versus them.
Exactly.
Like, if I do the ritual, I'm in the club. If you don't do the ritual, you're out.
Precisely. It builds walls. Now, contrast that with the text's definition of deen, which we will call the universal code or a system of life.
Okay, the universal code.
The text emphatically states that this universal code is not a religion.
Wait, really? Not a religion at all?
Not in the way we use the word. It is an objective standard of guidance meant for the collective. It is not designed for private weekend worship.
So what is it then?
It is a practical state and government framework designed to resolve all human conflicts in the material world.
Man, I'm trying to visualize the difference in practice. Let me try an analogy.
Go for it.
If I'm reading this right, fragmented religion mazhab is kind of like joining a very exclusive private country club.
Well, that's it.
Think about it. A country club has its own secret handshakes, exclusive membership dues, and a very strict set of rules. Maybe you have to wear a collared shirt to get into the dining room.
Right, you have to look the part.
But those rules only apply inside the clubhouse. If you're out on the public street, the country club's dress code means absolutely nothing. It's an artificial, isolated environment.
That's a really strong analogy.
Yeah.
The rules of the club only matter to the people who have agreed to join the club.
Right. But this universal code, this deen, is more like the weather outside the club. Or, going back to our earlier thought experiment, it's like the law of gravity.
Yes.
It applies to you whether you believe in it or not. It applies whether you are sitting inside the exclusive clubhouse or sleeping on a park bench outside.
It doesn't care who your parents are.
Exactly. It doesn't care what your lineage is, and it certainly doesn't care what you privately believe in your heart. You are subject to the mechanics of the system.
And the source text takes that gravity analogy incredibly literally. The universal code is not a set of suggestions. It is presented as the sociological equivalent of physics.
But I'm struggling with the leap the text is making here. How does Parwez's analysis justify equating a social, human-run political system to the unfeeling, mechanical, physical universe?
What do you mean?
I mean, humans aren't atoms. We have free will. We lie, we cheat, we change our minds. How can a social system act like physics?
Well, the linguistic foundation the text uses to build this bridge is fascinating. Parwez points out that the original scripture deliberately and repeatedly equates physical survival with ethical laws.
Really? How so?
It doesn't separate them. For example, it uses the concept of water, which gives biological life to all living things, or breath, which sustains physical existence. The text structuralizes these immutable physical realities right alongside its moral imperatives.
Wow. So it's setting up a direct parallel. It's essentially saying, in the exact same way your cells require water to not undergo necrosis, your society requires this specific ethical framework to not collapse into civil war.
Yes. And it goes even deeper into the mechanics of creation. The argument is that the Creator enacted universal laws for the physical universe without ever consulting the subjects of those laws.
What do you mean consulting the subjects?
Well, the text uses this great, slightly humorous point to illustrate it. God didn't hold a town hall meeting to ask the fish if they wanted to live in water.
Right.
He didn't ask the birds if aerodynamics was something they were comfortable with.
The universe just is. It operates on these unbending mechanics, and biological life adapts to those mechanics or it goes extinct.
Exactly. The laws of nature are enforced impartially, universally, and completely without human consultation. The text argues that the ethical protocols of the Universal Code are designed to be enforced with that exact same absolute uniformity.
Absolute uniformity.
Yeah. It posits a universal code of conduct that isn't socially constructed by human philosophers sitting around trying to figure out what goodness means through trial and error.
Right. It's not a focus group.
Instead, it reflects the vast, impartial mathematical program of the universe itself.
This completely upends how modern society functions. Think about it. We are so used to compartmentalizing belief as a completely private, protected activity.
Oh, absolutely.
You go to your specific place of worship, you do your deeply personal spiritual connection, and then Monday morning rolls around, you clock into work, and you operate by the real-world rules of capitalism or state law or corporate policy.
Two totally different rule books.
Yeah. And this text is asking you to imagine a world where the concept of belief is absolutely indistinguishable from constitutional societal law, where the ethics you practice on Monday are just as verifiable and just as universally applied as the fact that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
And the crucial component of that system is that there are absolutely no exceptions. Let's look at oxygen. The physical law governing oxygen doesn't bias itself. Oxygen doesn't care about your nationality. It doesn't care if you're an upstanding citizen or a convicted felon. You need it to fuel your cells.
Right.
The text argues that the divine ethical codes must be applied with that same blinding neutrality to all of humanity. No special privileges based on race, no bias based on nationality, and most controversially, no special treatment based on religious affiliation.
Wait, really? Even religious affiliation doesn't get you special treatment in this system?
According to the analysis, no. The Universal Code provides no VIP passes. If a law is truly universal, it must protect the non-believer exactly as much as it protects the believer.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go ahead.
If this universal code is so incredibly logical, if it's as universally beneficial and obvious as needing oxygen to breathe, why isn't humanity already running on it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Why did we end up with these fragmented, divided sectarian societies? Why do we have thousands of different fragmented religions and competing national laws instead of one unified physics-based morality?
Because operating an impartial system requires sacrificing personal advantage.
Ah.
And that brings us to the core poison that the text identifies as the destroyer of societies. If the universal code is defined by its uniformity, the thing that destroys it is the introduction of exceptions.
Exceptions.
Right. And the text roots this argument deeply in its analysis of verse 75 of Surah Al-Imran, which exposes what Parwez calls the lethal hypocrisy of moral duality.
Moral duality, creating two sets of rules. Okay, let's look at verse 75. How does the text break down this specific verse?
So, verse 75 highlights a very specific, very destructive ethical disease within human behavior. It describes a certain group of individuals who are highly trustworthy, but only under specific conditions. If you give them a mountain of gold or vast sums of wealth, they will guard it perfectly and return it intact, provided that you are part of their tribe, provided you are an insider.
Okay, so they have internal integrity. Within the borders of their own community or their own nation, they are upstanding, law-abiding citizens.
Yes, but here is the catastrophic twist the verse introduces. It says these exact same individuals who are so scrupulous with their own people will turn around and defraud an outsider out of a single coin.
Just one coin.
Just a single coin. The text translates the target of this fraud as the unlettered, or the foreigners. The verse claims they won't return what they owe to an outsider unless you literally stand over them and force them to.
Wow.
But the most crucial part of this analysis isn't just the act of theft. It's the psychological justification for the theft.
Right, because how do you justify being a saint to your neighbor and a thief to a stranger? How do they rationalize that?
They rationalize it through the lens of fragmented religion. The verse actually quotes their internal logic. There is no blame upon us concerning the outsiders.
So they just wipe their hands of it.
Exactly. They genuinely believe that because the victim isn't part of their exclusive religious or national club, exploiting them carries no moral weight. They believe God doesn't care how you treat people outside the club.
Wow. So they've essentially created a dual-track legal system in their minds. One rule book for us, where honesty is demanded, and a completely different rule book for them, where exploitation is completely fine, maybe even encouraged.
Exactly. The text terms this the dual standard of morality. And Parwez's analysis argues that this is the defining fatal characteristic of fragmented religion.
Because it creates loopholes.
Massive loopholes. It permits believers to lie, deceive, and economically exploit those outside their specific sect, all while falsely attributing this fraudulent behavior to the will of God. It's the ultimate ethical loophole.
Let's bring this into the modern era, because the text isn't just talking about ancient tribes trading gold coins in a desert market. It connects this dual standard directly to modern geopolitical systems, doesn't it?
It does, very directly. The source aligns this ancient moral duality perfectly with modern political and nationalistic morality. It uses a very striking quote from the 19th century Italian politician Count Cavour to illustrate this point.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah, Cavour famously said, "If we did for ourselves what we do for our country, what rascals we should be."
That is an incredibly revealing quote. Let's really think about what Cavour is admitting there. If we did for ourselves what we do for our country.
Let's trace the logic of that statement. In the framework of modern nationalism, a nation expects its citizens to act with strict integrity internally. You don't break into your neighbor's house and steal his television.
Right. If you do, you go to prison. You are a rascal, a criminal.
Exactly. Domestic law is based on internal trust and non-aggression. But on the international stage, the rules completely flip.
Oh, totally.
If your country uses its intelligence agencies to destabilize a foreign government, or uses military force to secure foreign oil fields, or uses predatory trade agreements to extract resources from a developing nation, that isn't called theft.
No, it's rebranded.
It's praised as patriotism or securing national interests or realpolitik.
It's the exact same dual standard from the ancient verse. If I steal a TV, I'm a thief. If my country steals a natural resource, the people who orchestrated it get reelected and have statues built in their honor.
Right.
The text is essentially arguing that a nation acting purely in its national interest to exploit a foreign nation isn't just engaging in tough, pragmatic politics. It is committing a catastrophic violation of natural law.
And this is where the text introduces one of its most powerful analogies to explain why it's a violation of natural law. It introduces the metaphor of arsenic.
Arsenic. So we are back to chemistry and physics.
Yes. The text argues that economic exploitation, systemic fraud, and the unlawful consumption of wealth are not merely sins.
Right.
They aren't just invisible demerit points on some spiritual scorecard that you have to answer for after you die. The text argues they act on a society exactly how chemical poisons act on a biological body.
Okay, I want to challenge this because arsenic is physical. If I eat arsenic, my cells biologically break down and I die. But economics, trade agreements, national interests, these are abstract human concepts. How can abstract concepts act like physical poison?
Because human society, while abstract in its rules, relies on physical realities to function, primarily. The physical reality of trust and cooperation.
Okay.
Let's look at the mechanics of the metaphor. The physical law dictates that eating arsenic kills human biology. It doesn't matter what your lineage is. The text explicitly mentions historical lineages. It doesn't matter if you are Bani Israel or Bani Ismail. Arsenic kills universally.
Right.
The source argues that, similarly, consuming unlawfully acquired wealth inevitably destroys the collective social body because it chemically dissolves the bonds of trust that allow society to function.
Okay, I see the mechanism now. If a society normalizes fraud, even if it's only fraud against outsiders, you are introducing the chemical of deception into the societal bloodstream, and you can't contain it. Eventually, the people who justify cheating foreigners will start justifying cheating their neighbors because the moral absolute has been broken.
Rot spreads.
Trust evaporates. Supply chains break down because nobody trusts the contracts. The economy collapses and the society dies. It is a physical consequence.
Exactly. A dual standard cannot be contained. The law of absolute uniformity demands that fulfilling obligations to an outsider must be mechanically identical to fulfilling them to an insider. There can be no exceptions.
No exceptions at all.
None. Justice cannot be compartmentalized into private and public spheres or national and international spheres. The text asserts that any system, whether it's an ancient tribe or a modern superpower operating on a dual morality, has ingested poison and will inevitably face ruin.
It is such a rigorous, unforgiving standard, but it makes undeniable logical sense. If you have a global system where every nation is constantly trying to economically or militarily exploit every other nation, the system is eventually going to tear itself apart.
Which we see happening.
We see the friction of that every day in the news. But if this universal code is so logically sound and so obviously necessary for long-term human survival, who is actively stopping it from being implemented? Because someone must be fighting this.
Oh, definitely. There are factions who profit immensely from fragmentation and the dual standard. To understand who they are and how they operate, the text turns to verses 71 and 72 of Surah Al-Imran, which introduce us to the gatekeepers.
The gatekeepers, the people standing at the door of the system, how does the text define their operation?
Well, the source outlines two very specific, highly sophisticated strategies used by religious and political elites to stop the universal system from taking root in society. The first strategy is detailed in verse 71, and the text refers to it as talbiz-e-haq.
Talbiz-e-haq. Let's translate and break that down. What are we talking about conceptually?
It translates roughly to the concealment, or more accurately, the deliberate intertwining of truth with falsehood.
Intertwined.
Yes. The verse exposes a conscious act by the religious elite, who are referred to historically as the Abar and Reuben, the scholars, monks, or the priesthood class. They don't just deny the truth. That would be too obvious.
Right. People would see right through that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, they mix the objective, pure truth of the universal code with mountains of man-made dogmas.
So they dilute it.
They do more than dilute it. They entangle it. They intentionally intertwine the pure divine system with so much subjective human tradition, superstition, and ritual that the original objective constitutional truth becomes completely obscured, becomes unrecognizable to the average person.
I am fascinated by the mechanics of this. This isn't just human error over time. This isn't just people forgetting the original rules. The text is alleging active intentional obfuscation.
Yes, it is.
It's the ancient equivalent of a massive corporate espionage operation or like a state-sponsored disinformation campaign.
Disinformation campaign is the perfect modern equivalent, and that perfectly sets up the second strategy, found in verse 72, which the text calls the whispering campaign.
A whispering campaign. How does that work in this context?
Verse 72 exposes an ideological infiltration tactic. It describes a faction of people who are instructed by their leaders to pretend to accept the divine system in the morning, only to publicly reject it by the evening.
I'm struggling to see the strategic value of that. Why would you go through the effort of faking a conversion? If you hate the system, why not just fight it openly from the outside? Gather an army, write a competing book, and debate them in the public square.
Because fighting a logically sound, universal truth openly is incredibly difficult, often impossible.
Fair point.
If a system is proposing absolute justice, mathematical equality, and the end of poverty through fair resource management, it's very hard to stand up in the public square and say, no, we shouldn't do that. We should have inequality and theft. You will lose the public debate.
Right. You can't openly campaign on a platform of let's be evil.
Exactly. So you use subversion. If you enter the group, pretend to be a sincere believer, you gain inside credibility. The community accepts you. Then, by evening, or after a period of time, you publicly defect. You say, listen, everyone, I joined this movement, I read the texts, I looked at it from the inside with an open mind. And you know what? It doesn't actually work.
Huh.
The leaders are corrupt, the logic is flawed, it's a scam.
Oh, that is insidious. Because it's not an attack from an enemy, it's a betrayal from a friend.
Exactly.
It is specifically designed to create devastating psychological doubt among the actual sincere followers. It's an ideological Trojan horse.
That is exactly how the text interprets this historically. Parwez argues that when the enemies of the Quranic socio-political system realized they couldn't defeat it on the battlefield, and they couldn't defeat its logic in open debate, they changed tactics.
They went underground.
They entered the system disguised as devout believers. And once they were inside, over decades and centuries, they slowly, insidiously introduced pre-existing dogmas, referred to as jahiliyyah. They brought in Zoroastrian, Jewish, and Christian theological concepts, slowly integrating them until those imported, fragmented ideas became accepted as mainstream beliefs within the new system.
It's brilliant in a dark way. They realized they couldn't burn the original Constitution because it was too well protected or too popular, so they just flooded the zone with contradictory footnotes, addendums, and fake historical precedents until no one could figure out what the original text even meant.
And this creates a catastrophic societal vulnerability which leads to the ultimate goal of the gatekeepers, the rise of sectarian monopolies.
Okay, let's break that down.
Let's look at the sociology of this. Once the original, crystal-clear universal code is buried under a mountain of confusing, contradictory traditions and footnotes, the average person can't navigate it anymore. They become dependent.
And the gatekeepers step in and say, "Don't worry, my child. This text is far too complicated for a layman like you to understand.
We are the only ones with the specialized training to decipher this mess.
Just listen to us, give us your allegiance, and we will tell you what God wants."
Precisely. The text analysis of verses 73 and 74 details how these religious leaders condition their followers to only trust those within their specific sect or party. They create an environment of extreme prejudice and intellectual isolation.
Wow.
The text points out that these leaders absolutely dread acknowledging the universal truth, because a universal, easily understood code would instantly destroy their monopolies.
Because if the truth is universal, you don't need a middleman. If the moral law is as clear and verifiable as gravity, I don't need to pay a priest to explain gravity to me. I just drop an apple and watch it fall.
Right. For instance, the text highlights the historical claim among some groups that prophethood or divine favor and leadership belonged exclusively to one specific lineage, like Bani Israel.
Right, trying to keep it in the family.
The gatekeepers want to maintain their racial or religious supremacy. But the text aggressively counters this by asserting the law of absolute human equality.
Let's define the mechanics of that law of equality. What does it actually mandate?
It mandates that divine bounty, responsibility, and leadership are distributed based entirely on objective merit, not on inherited rights, bloodlines, or sectarian affiliation.
So no nepotism.
None. True guidance is universal and accessible to anyone who seeks it through reason. It completely shatters the idea that any specific tribe, nation, or religious sect has a permanent monopoly on truth or divine favor.
Okay, so we have a clear picture of the battlefield now. We have these gatekeepers running massive, multi-generational disinformation campaigns, intertwining truth with falsehood, and setting up sectarian monopolies to keep people divided, confused, and dependent.
That's the landscape.
But I'm still hung up on the logistics. How exactly did they permanently attach their footnotes to the divine constitution? If the original text was written down and preserved, how do you make a fabrication stick around for 1,000 years?
To achieve that level of permanence, you can't just tell a lie. You have to elevate your footnotes to the exact same sacred status as the original text. And that brings us to the profound intellectual forgery described in the analysis of verse 78.
Verse 78. Let's break down the mechanism of this forgery. What does the text say they actually did?
The verse aggressively condemns those who physically twist their tongues with the book. They present human-made fabrications, their own writings, their own traditions as divine law.
So they just make it up.
They create a rule themselves and then claim this is from Allah, while knowing perfectly well it is a human invention.
That is a massive theological accusation. How does Parwez's analysis apply this verse to the actual timeline of Islamic history?
The text connects this ancient warning directly to a parallel development in later Islamic history, the elevation of secondary human collective traditions to the status of divine revelation.
Okay, what are we talking about here specifically?
In the theological vocabulary, these are often called the ahadith, or the concept of wahi kafi, which translates to hidden revelations.
Let's look at the timeline the notes provide here, because the historical logistics are crucial to understanding the critique.
The notes strongly emphasize that these vast collections of oral traditions were compiled 250 to 300 years after the death of the prophet.
Wait, 300 years?
Yes. They were not written down contemporaneously. They were passed down entirely based on human memory. It was a chain of narration. I heard from someone who heard from someone who heard from someone.
Try playing a game of telephone in a single room for 10 minutes, and the message gets distorted. This text is talking about playing a game of telephone across continents through wars, political upheavals, and regime changes for 300 years.
Exactly. The text argues that the original book, the Quran, was preserved exactly in its written form, as an objective, verifiable document.
Right.
But centuries later, these massive human collections of oral rumors and historical memories were elevated by the religious elite. They demanded these traditions be treated as unassailable divine law, functionally equal to, and sometimes even superseding, the Quran itself.
So they essentially created a parallel constitution. They couldn't alter the primary document, so they created a shadow document and convinced the masses that you couldn't understand the primary document without the shadow document.
They did. And the source compares this directly to the historical Jewish concept of dividing revelation into two distinct parts: the written Torah, which everyone could see, and the unwritten oral traditions managed exclusively by the priesthood.
It's all about control.
By claiming that there is a hidden revelation that only the scholars have access to, the gatekeepers permanently secure their power over the masses.
And the text's critique doesn't just stop at these historical, legalistic traditions, does it? It goes after the more spiritual side of things, too. It critiques mysticism.
Oh, it attacks mysticism or tasawwuf of it very aggressively.
Really?
The text outright rejects the concept of esoteric or Baden interpretations. These are hidden meanings. Mysticism often claims that the true, deep meaning of the scripture is detached from the actual, literal Arabic words on the page.
So what is it attached to?
They claim it can only be understood through a spiritual guide, an inner light, or a mystical experience.
There's a very specific, vivid metaphor mentioned in the notes here regarding this, attributed to the famous mystic poet Rumi.
Yes, and the source uses this quote to highlight everything it believes is wrong with the mystical approach. The quote attributed to Rumi is, "We have taken the marrow from the Quran and thrown the bones to the dogs."
That is a shocking thing to say about a text you consider holy.
The source material is absolutely horrified by this statement. Parwez argues that this mystical mindset fundamentally disrespects the text. It reduces the protected, literal, objective words of God, the actual Arabic constitutional text, to mere bones that can be tossed aside.
Right.
Meanwhile, the mystics claim they have extracted the true, hidden marrow through their own subjective spiritual intuition.
I need to pause here because this is a huge paradigm shift for a lot of people. Mysticism is usually seen as the peaceful, beautiful, poetic part of religion. It's the part people like.
It's very popular, yes.
But if I'm understanding this source correctly, it's saying that if a modern reader truly wants to understand the universal code, they must completely bypass centuries of established scholarly commentaries, they must ignore the historical oral traditions, and they must throw out the mystical interpretations,
Yes.
because all of those things act as a subjective filter that distorts the objective law.
You are understanding it perfectly, and this raises an incredibly important question about authority. And the answer, according to the source, is an absolute, uncompromising yes. You must bypass the filters.
Wow.
The expert analysis introduces what it calls the law of singularity of truth.
The singularity of truth, let's define that.
It means there is only one objective standard for human guidance, the preserved book itself, on its own merits.
On its own merits.
Any attempt to parallel it with secondary human traditions, sectarian dogmas, or hidden mystical meanings is viewed as a fatal subversion of the system. Is the ultimate intellectual forgery because it replaces an objective, verifiable constitutional law with subjective, contradictory, and easily manipulated human reports.
Because if the law is hidden in the marrow, and only a special priest who has spent 20 years meditating on a mountain can access it, we are right back in the country club.
Exactly.
We are back to a monopoly. The law isn't gravity anymore. The law is whatever the mystic feels like it is today. You lose all accountability.
Precisely. You lose the absolute uniformity. You lose the universal code. You replace the rule of law with the rule of men.
Okay, so let's game this out. Let's say humanity actually does it. Let's say we strip away all these secondary, short-term human interpretations. We fire the gatekeepers. We dismantle the country clubs. We completely reject the dual standard of morality that allows us to exploit outsiders.
It's a tall order, but let's imagine it.
We get back to the pure mathematical, objective, universal code. If we do all that, what is the ultimate long-term goal of this system? What kind of society are we actually trying to build?
We are building what the text calls the institutionalization of universal providence. The Arabic term used is rububiyat. And we see the foundational argument for this massive societal shift in the analysis of verse 77.
Verse 77, let's dig into the text. What does it establish?
The verse harshly condemns those who sell the universal values. Essentially, those who break God's covenant for immediate, selfish, worldly gains.
Okay.
The specific Arabic term used in the verse is thiman-i-qalil, which traditionally translates simply to a small price.
Like the classic trope of selling out your ideals for a few silver coins.
Right. The historical image is someone taking a bribe. But Parwez functionally redefines thiman-i-qalil in a much broader, systemic, and economic way. It's not just about a corrupt judge taking a bag of coins.
So what is it?
It represents ADY, short-term, selfish material gain that compromises the long-term survival and health of the society.
Okay, let's build a real-world analogy for this.
Mm.
What does systemic Thaman equilial look like today?
Think about a modern corporation or a society that clear-cuts an entire ancient forest to sell the timber for a massive immediate profit this quarter. The executives get huge bonuses, the shareholders are happy today, but they destroy the ecosystem, the water table collapses, and in 50 years, the land is a barren desert and their grandchildren are starving.
That's devastating.
That quick timber profit, that quarterly bonus, is Thaman e Khalil. It is sacrificing the permanent for the temporary.
It's extracting wealth from the future to fund luxury in the present.
Exactly. And conversely, the text introduces the antidote to this extraction. Rububiyat, which means universal providence, and Afadi Amma, which translates the collective long-term prosperity of all coming generations.
So the goal of the Universal Code isn't just to make sure everyone currently alive has enough to eat today. It's about designing a sustainable structural system so that humanity can stand on its own feet for centuries. It's multi-generational resource management.
Yes. And the notes provide a powerful, highly debated historical precedent for this from early Islamic history involving Hazrat Umar, the second caliph.
What happened there?
Well, when the vast, incredibly wealthy lands of Iraq were conquered by the state, there was immense pressure from the military generals and the soldiers to distribute the land among them as spoils of war.
Right. That was the standard operating procedure of the ancient world. You fight the war, you win, you get a farm.
Yeah.
That is the immediate payout.
But Hazrat Umar refused. The text notes that after a month of intense debate with his advisors and generals, he used the principles of the Quran to argue that these massive economic resources could not be hoarded by the individuals who happen to be alive and holding swords today.
Wow. So what did he do with it?
Instead, he made a radical economic decision. He retained the conquered lands as state property, placing them into a collective trust, specifically to ensure the economic security of future generations.
I want to really explore the economic implications of that because it's staggering. It's like the difference between a CEO who deliberately guts a company, firing the experienced staff, selling off the manufacturing equipment, and slashing product quality just to get a massive quarterly profit and a golden parachute right now, knowing the company will go bankrupt in 2 years.
Right.
Versus a CEO who takes a pay cut and invests heavily in research and development so the company can invent new technologies and employ people for the next 50 years. The text is demanding that we operate human society on a 50th century timeline, not a quarterly earnings report.
That is exactly the point.
Yeah.
It is a complete rejection of short-term capitalism or short-term exploitation.
Yeah.
And here is where the text makes one of its most radical theological reinterpretations to support this economic system.
Okay, what is it?
It fundamentally reinterprets the concept of akhirah, the hereafter.
The hereafter, which in almost every religious tradition refers exclusively to life after death. Heaven, hell, angels, the spiritual afterlife.
Right. While the text acknowledges the spiritual aspect of consciousness continuing, it functionally represents akhirah as the future. Specifically, the future of the human self, but also the continuous future of human society here on Earth.
Hold on. So when the text talks about securing your akhirah, it isn't just talking about praying enough times a day to earn a ticket into a metaphysical heaven.
Not at all.
It's talking about building a sustainable, equitable future for the generations that will inherit the earth after you are gone.
Yes. The text argues that true ethical living operating on the deen requires visionary actions that secure the prosperity of coming generations. If you exploit society for short-term profit, if you chase that Themani Khalil, you are destroying the future, and therefore you will have no share in the future.
You have destroyed your akhirah.
Exactly. And crucially, in a true Quranic state running on this universal code, these exploiters cannot just be politely asked to stop. They must be actively stripped of their influence and power to protect the coming generations.
You cannot let the CEO who wants to gut the company stay in charge of the company. No matter how much money he promises to make the board today, you have to remove him to protect the future workers.
Precisely. A society running on the universal code must legally prioritize the collective future over individual hoarding in the present. It is a system of radical long-term responsibility.
This is a massive, sweeping, almost intimidating vision for how human beings should live together. It's not just a set of beliefs, it is an entirely different operating system for human civilization.
It really is an operating system upgrade.
But to make this massive long-term vision actually work in practice, how do we actually read and apply this ancient book today? If
Yeah.
we're throwing out the centuries of scholarly commentaries, if we're rejecting the mystical intuitions, if we're ignoring the secondary oral traditions, what tools are we left with?
It's a fair question.
How do we objectively understand the text so we can build this society?
That brings us to the final domain extracted from the text's analysis, the actionable blueprint, which falls under the technical and educational methodology. The core actionable step here is a highly specific methodology called Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran.
Let's define that methodology. What does it mean?
It means the Quran explains the Quran. The goal is to standardize the understanding of the text using internal logic. You do not look outside the book, to history, to rumor, to mysticism, to understand what is inside the book.
I understand the theory, but how does that actually work in practice? If I hit a word I don't understand, what do I do?
You apply a two-step verification process. First, you interpret the terms strictly through their classical Arabic root meanings. Arabic is a highly mathematical language based on root letters.
Okay.
You trace the words back to their fundamental objective linguistic roots, completely rejecting any subjective, esoteric, or hidden meanings that have been attached to the words over centuries by theologians.
So going back to the Rumi metaphor, if the text says bone, you analyze the root word for bone. You don't get to say, well, spiritually, I feel like this bone actually represents marrow. You stick to the linguistic math.
Right, you stick to the linguistics. And second, and this is the key that ties this entire framework back to our opening hook about physics, you must verify those linguistic meanings against the objective physical laws of the universe.
Because the text fundamentally claims that its ethical laws are completely parallel to physical laws.
Yes. The ultimate goal is to discover and teach ethical laws with the exact same absolute uniformity as the laws of physics. Let's test it. If a specific interpretation of the text results in a system of moral duality, if an interpretation tells you that it's okay to cheat an outsider or hoard wealth while others starve, you instantly know that interpretation is false.
Because physics doesn't work that way.
Exactly. Gravity pulls everyone equally. Arsenic kills everyone equally. Therefore, the ethical law against fraud must protect everyone equally. If your translation creates inequality, your translation is mathematically incorrect.
So, to summarize the mission here, we are looking at a blueprint that requires total societal reconstruction. We have to eradicate moral duality in all our dealings, public and private. We have to identify and fire the gatekeepers who try to monopolize the truth with hidden meanings.
Right.
We have to legally manage our global resources for our great-great-grandchildren, flat out refusing short-term economic exploitation. And to do all this, we have to treat this ancient text like a constitutional linguistic puzzle that solves itself, verifying its laws against the unbending realities of the physical universe without ever needing outside historical rumors or mystical intuition.
That is the complete blueprint. And the ultimate takeaway from Parwez's analysis of these verses is this: knowledge is only valuable when it is applied objectively.
Applied object.
The source believes and argues with incredible structural rigor that humanity can only survive its current crises of war, inequality, and economic collapse if we force a transition. We must evolve away from the fragmented, tribal, exclusive country clubs of fragmented religion and build a unified, mathematically impartial society based on the universal code.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It requires us to abandon everything we find comfortable about being in an exclusive club.
It does, and I want to turn this analysis over to you, the listener. What stands out to you from all of this? I want you to genuinely think about the systems you operate in every single day. Look at your workplace, look at your local community, look at your national government. Are they running on the universal code?
Are they built on objective, transparent, universal rules that apply equally to the CEO and the janitor?
Or, if you look closely, are they running on fragmented religion? Are they built on office politics, secret cliques, gatekeepers hoarding information, and a dual standard of morality that protects the insiders while exploiting the outsiders?
When you really analyze it through that lens, you start seeing that dual standard everywhere. It seems to be the default human setting to form small tribes, build walls, and make exceptions for ourselves while demanding perfection from everyone else.
And the default human setting is exactly why the text argues that the universal code cannot rely on human feelings. It has to be enforced with the strictness of natural law. Left to our own devices, Our feelings will always convince us to build country clubs.
Well, we have covered a truly massive amount of ground today, completely deconstructing the concept of morality. We started by redefining religion itself, moving away from private ritual to an objective system of life. We explored the arsenic of moral duality, where the act of treating outsiders worse than insiders isn't just rude, it's seen as a chemical poison introduced into the societal bloodstream.
We covered a lot.
We really did. We looked at the sophisticated dangers of ideological Trojan horses, whispering campaigns, and the intellectual forgery of treating faulty human memory as divine law. And finally, we looked at the economic blueprint for long-term human prosperity, demanding that we operate on a timeline of centuries, securing the future rather than exploiting the present.
It is a rigorous, demanding framework that leaves absolutely no room for hypocrisy or special privileges.
It really doesn't. And to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the text's core premise, if true ethical laws are indeed as objective, as unbending, and as verifiable as the laws of physics, how would we go about actually testing our current societal morals in a lab?
Oh, that's a great question.
What if our economic policies, our tax codes, and our international treaties were legally subject to the exact same rigorous, impartial peer review as the law of gravity? Imagine what kind of world we'd have to build if we couldn't just believe we were good people, but had to mathematically prove it by guaranteeing the universal survival and prosperity of everyone around us.
That would be a world finally operating on the universal code.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it sparked some new ways of looking at the world. Keep asking questions, keep challenging your own assumptions, and we will see you next time.